thanks everyone for joining tonight. This is an important subject because certification is a great way to give your career a boost as well as your earnings. But it's important to know that there are a variety of options out there for you. I will be talking mostly about healthcare, but I will touch on some of the other certifications that are available for interpreters because it's all good. So there you go. There's my badge for my national healthcare certification on the left, and the one on the right is the managing director for CCHI, Natalia Mitareva. And let's talk about, well, know a little bit about me first. I, like many of you, grew up as the English speaking child, or the better English speaker in my family of 3 generations. We're originally from Brazil, and we moved back to Brazil when I was 8, which is the reason why I speak English like an American and nobody else in my family does. But I also did many of the things that are not recommended, like being the child interpreter for family members when they were sick or about to face surgery. And sort of partly from learning by experience and from a lot of training. I went to school. I have 2 masters. I have a teaching English as a foreign language certificate. I'm certified as a trainer of trainers of healthcare interpreters. And I'm also certified by Washington State, as well as nationally certified by CCHI. I currently chair the Standards and Training Committee for National Council, and I am also a former commissioner for CCHI, which means I've had my finger in a lot of pies over the years and have worked to develop material and training for interpreters, as well as to continually polish the standards by which we perform our profession. So before we get into the different certifications, I did want to see if people are aware of a major misunderstanding that I often see out there in the real world, whether it's hiring managers or interpreters themselves, who may have a certificate of training, a certificate of completion, a certificate of attendance, but a certificate is not a certification. They're 2 very different animals. A certificate is a very good thing. It's evidence, it's proof of education, of training, but it can also be a certificate of perfect attendance. It's not the same thing as a certification. A certification is evidence of passing an exam that meets industry standards, that has generally been vetted by an independent third party, and is a standardized test that is issued to all who take it, as opposed to, say, perhaps in-house test that a language service provider or agency might administer to an interpreter, and then you register with another agency and you take another test. None of those in-house tests are certification tests. They may be a knowledge-based test, and you may get a certificate that you pass, but it's not the same thing as a certification. So having separated those, let's take a quick peek at what all is available, because for people here in Washington State, we are lucky. We have more options available than almost any other resident of the other 49 states. So very quickly, for court, every single one of the 50 states has something called the Administrative Office of the Courts, the AOC. They may have slightly different rules as to how you stay accredited or how many continuing education credits you need to maintain your certification in good standing, but they all have a process that you follow to complete training, to take the written and oral proficiency, and then be certified by the AOC of your state to be able to interpret in a courtroom setting. Often those are tiered into 2 groups. The certified group, which is the languages that are most commonly needed for that state. So that's one of the reasons why that varies from state to state. Here in Washington, languages that are in need might be Somali, Vietnamese, Russian, a couple of dialects of Chinese, and of course, always Spanish in all 50 states. But if I go to Massachusetts, it's Portuguese and Haitian Creole that are in the top three, not Vietnamese, not Mandarin, not Cantonese, not Russian, not Somali. So those regional shifts also impact how much demand there is for a particular language. And court interpreters tend to be bound by the certification offered by their state. For example, I was court certified in New Jersey, but that does not have reciprocity with the state of Washington, nor does it have reciprocity with its closest neighbor, New York, but it does have reciprocity with 27 states. So depending on what state you're in and who they've decided to accept certification for, you may be able to work in more than one state. But as I said, all the AOC certifications are at the state level and state administered. They often also have a tiered structure within that court interpreter system. And those titles can range from conditionally approved, meaning you just squeaked by on the test with sufficient points to pass, but not a very high grade. And so experience and length of service will be factored in before you can move up in the ranks and in the rate of pay to be a court interpreter, to be a journeyman interpreter, or to be a master level of interpreter. And all of the 50 states have a secondary tier of authorized, registered, or conditionally approved designations for those languages of lesser demand, those languages that don't fall in the top 5 or the top 10. And unless I am in Massachusetts or Rhode Island, a little bit of Connecticut, Portuguese is not one of the top 5 or the top 10 languages demanded in any of the states. So my registration would generally fall in that registered or approved category rather than certified. But if it's Spanish, all 50 states certify Spanish interpreters. For the federal courts, interestingly enough, there's only 2 languages at the federal certified level. Spanish, of course, but that was actually the second language that they developed an oral proficiency exam for. The very first federally certified exam was as a result of litigation brought by the Navajo tribe against the US federal government for forfeiture of their land and not holding signed treaties. So those are the 2 languages that are federally certified, Navajo and Spanish. So a little interesting mix because Navajo is not on any other list that you'll find. Now for healthcare, we have a broad array of choices. 2 on the national level have specific written and oral proficiency tests. That would be the CHI, the Certified Healthcare Interpreter, which is under the auspices of CCHI, and the CMI, which is Certified Medical Interpreter, under the auspices of NBCMI, which stands for National Board of Certification for Medical Interpreters. They both offer a lower level certification, which is the written test only and no oral proficiency exam. That's the certification I have with CHI, which is called the core CHI. The written test is the same for both the higher level exam with the oral component and those languages that do not yet have an oral component. And CMI recently introduced something quite similar, and they call that the hub CMI. Again, it's the same written test that would be step 1 if you spoke one of the certified languages like Spanish is. And if you speak one of the rarer languages, there's as yet no oral proficiency test at the national level. So we'll see further on what type of proof you need to provide to indicate or to demonstrate that you have proficiency in both languages. And Washington State has DSHS, Certified Medical Interpreter, which No other state has. Oregon has a state level medical interpreter test, but it's the national CHI or CMI. California also has a method of testing, but it leads directly to the CHI or the CMI. Washington State has had since I think it's 1991, correct me if I'm wrong, but for a long time, a medical interpreter certification and a social services certification for interpreters. So that kind of sets Washington apart as being really ahead of the curve, really forward thinking, and having these certifications available because they know that using a qualified, certified interpreter is far better than someone who is bilingual. Bilingual individuals may speak two languages, but not everybody who speaks two languages can interpret well. It's just like saying, most of us like music, but not all of us can carry a tune. Not all of us can get up on stage and perform. A lot of music lovers out there that would have stage fright or not be able to competently carry out the task, even though they understand when something is on tune and when something is off key. So that's the similarity that I use to try to help people understand that yes, if you're bilingual, that's great. You have those language skills, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have the skill set to be able to interpret the way that we should, which is what? Accurately, which is interpreting meaning rather than word for word, which is being able to have the short-term memory to accurately remember everything that's said so that you can repeat it in the second language without adding anything, without omitting anything, without distorting anything. Those are challenging tasks, especially if the person speaks slightly differently than the region that you're used to. There's so many different Spanishes, more so than many languages. There's a lot of specialized terminology, and registers can go anywhere from street level and slang to specific to certain behaviors to high level registers, whether they be academic or related to medical terminology. So untrained bilingual individuals don't have that knowledge, haven't practiced those skills, and are generally completely unaware of what the standards of practice are, what the code of ethics is about, and what privacy laws encompass. So there's a lot of minefield danger when you use an unqualified, untrained bilingual person to be your interpreter and to provide language access. So I don't recommend it. So all of the national certifications vet candidates for eligibility, and all of them will require proof of language proficiency in both languages. They will require X number of total hours of training prior to sitting for the exam and some work experience. And these claims will be verified by that certifying body prior to their issuing you a date to take the exam. So once the criteria has been met and passed, then you pay your fee, you register to take the exam, and those written and oral proficiency exams are proctored via a third party, either in person at a professional or independent testing site, or since the pandemic began, both national certifying bodies have pivoted to offer the test remotely from home. But there are a series of hoops you kind of have to jump through before that can take place, including systems requirements that we'll go into, as well as a private testing space. Um, and they'll make it easy for you step by step. I have included the links to the exam prep as well as the preparation for taking the exams from home. But that's really convenient. I had to drive, where was it? I'm in Tacoma, so I had to drive somewhere in Redmond at one of the Microsoft testing sites that they use to license people for different levels of, I don't know, writing code or overseeing systems for Microsoft. That vendor is the same one that CCHI used to administer the test back when I took it. Now you can take it from home. And I don't know how long that this will continue, the take from home option, because it was instituted as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. And at some point that may go away. So I would encourage you, if you're on the fence, sooner rather than later, you can take it from home. At some point, that's probably going to go away and it's going to go back to testing at the official testing site. Like when you take the GRE or the SAT, you go to those places where you put your stuff in a locker and you go into the room to take the test. That's what the private testing site is like. For sign language interpreters, there are two choices for certification: the Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf, known as RID, and the NIC, the National Interpreter Certification. Both of those organizations have been bogged down by some inner turmoil lately. So Texas came up with a board for evaluation of interpreter certification for sign language interpreters as an alternative route for folks to become certified as ASL interpreters. What's interesting is that all three of these organizations, only BEI offers training in healthcare. So often the ASL interpreters from RID or NIC will come over to National Council or IMIA or HCIN, Healthcare Interpreter Network, to take some training in the healthcare field, because that subspecialization within the ASL certification has yet to be offered for them. Now, I can't stress enough how important certification would be for any potential interpreter to obtain, because any facility that takes 1 cent of federal money per year or more is required to use a certified, or as they term it, certified, qualified, and trained interpreter. So if you want to work at Children's Hospital or at Harborview or at Swedish or Virginia Mason or Northwest or Evergreen or Valley Medical or Good Samaritan or St. Joseph's, like any hospital system, SCCA, Fred Hutch, you have to be certified. You can't have taken a lot of training and gotten wonderful score on your tests in school, but lack certification. You will not step foot into the public health arena. All of those outpatient clinics like CMAR and UW health system, they all require all interpreters that work on site to be certified. If you're not certified, one of the best options is to hook up with a large language service provider, a nationwide reach, because they will do in-house training, and depending on the company, will often subsidize the cost of your taking the test, but they will prep you to help you be ready, because they know to sell their service, they want to be able to advertise that all or a very high percentage of their workforce is certified. And within hospital administration, risk management, the upper level C-suite, it is best practice to hire certified interpreters. So like I mentioned before, the bilingual individual may have the language skill, but they may lack the interpreting skill to be able to convert messages with accuracy or with little distortion. And the Code of Ethics standards of practice, and in particular, patient privacy laws, may be somewhat of a mystery to them. And that can't be if you're going to be in any facility that receives government dollars. And there's a big fee and liability. Joint Commission is an organization that accredits hospitals, and they specifically come and check. They will pull files on personnel if they're staff interpreters at the hospital, they'll ask you to open the file. I know I've been there when they've done that, and randomly pull 2 or 3 files and check to see when that interpreter got certified, if they've been recertified, if their certification is in good standing, in order to be an employee of that hospital, medical center, or outpatient clinic. So it really is part and parcel of the professionalism that's expected of an interpreter, is to aim for eventually getting certified. It's also the law. Since the ACA came into effect, especially to comply with the old Title VI, the updated Section 1557, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. So using a helpful friend or a family member to interpret for you does not comply with the law. And more administrators of language access, community outreach, patient satisfaction, what else is it called? Sometimes it's called directly interpreter services, but in hospitals, there's a lot of different names for where interpreter services could be housed. And more the people that run those programs understand that in order to be in compliance with the law, interpreting services needs to be offered. Now, not every facility will hire staff interpreters to be physically on site, but every facility should have at least a contract with a language service provider so that there can be access to interpreters via telephone, or the most popular option when the interpreter is not physically present in the room, video remote interpreting. So what happens when you get certified? We still, as a profession, expect you to continue your education. There are continuing education requirements for you to be able to renew your certification when it reaches the end of its term limit, whether it's 4 or 5 years. If you're somebody who hires interpreters, more and more the awareness is out there that you should be choosing certified and well-trained staff. There are proven benefits to working with qualified certified interpreters. Everyone, whether they're limited English proficient, deaf, or deafblind, deserve the ability to communicate just like a speaking, seeing, hearing person does. Certified qualified court interpreters reduce miscommunication and ongoing litigation. Using healthcare interpreter who is certified and qualified does a lot of good things that hospitals are beginning to recognize, in the sense that it's quantified with numbers. Length of stay, what is referred to as LOS, is reduced when interpreters are utilized for communicating with patients. Hospital readmission rates are significantly lower for patients who understand how to take their medication or take care of themselves when they go home. If that understanding is lacking, we have readmission. Utilization of the emergency room as primary care provider also goes down, because the interpreter is able to point that patient to a primary care clinic where they can go for checkups, for colds, for earaches, for stomach aches, rather than going to the most expensive per minute cost area to receive treatment, which would be the emergency room. So that also reduces the risk for healthcare facilities. That message was slow to get out, but it has really caught on. And I do believe the pandemic has spurred greater understanding of just how much better things can go for the patient if they have an interpreter early on when they first come into contact with their healthcare facility. So in effect, consistently using certified and trained healthcare interpreters reduces health disparities, and that's good for society as a whole. And that's a benefit that you as a professional interpreter can really be proud of. So what defines any job as a profession? There's generally 6 elements. And so far, healthcare interpreters have successfully held up 3 of those, and we're still working towards getting recognition in the remaining 3. So the first one is has a code of ethics, standards of conduct that are enforceable. The profession serves a higher public good. There are professional associations overseeing that field. So healthcare interpreters, we have those 3 things, but we are not yet regulated by a professional body or federal government. And there is no legal recognition yet for the profession. If you look at the Department of Labor statistics, interpreters are still sort of lumped in under translators. And those are 2 very different fields with 2 very different rates of pay. So it doesn't really give you an accurate view of what it's like for interpreters in the field right now. And professions have control to a certain degree of their remuneration or advertising. And still to this day, the rates paid to interpreters are pretty much governed by what I call the race to the bottom, the competitiveness between language service providers trying to underbid and undercut each other is not doing us as the working interpreter any favors. Let's look at what's available at the national level for medical interpreters. CCHI, which is the Certification Commission for Healthcare Interpreters, offers 2 national certifications. They have 3 languages that currently have the oral component as well as the written test, and that's Spanish, Arabic, and Mandarin. And then the core CHI, which is the same written test, but stops at that point. And then you, as the interpreter, furnish proof of your language proficiency in your second language. What's different about CCHI is that it is also accredited. And accreditation is important because it is something that is done by an independent third party that vets your entire process from the development of the test, what subject matter experts you used, what process you used for grading. For example, CCHI, when they grade tests, don't give the entire test to one rater. It's divided in chunks among several raters and then repeated because they want to make sure that there isn't a big disparity. Yes, for online questions that can be answered A, B, C, D, E, or none of the above, there is a right and wrong answer. But if there is a recording of an interpretation, that's more subjective and requires a human rater to grade that response. And if there is a disparity, they will repeat and send it out to additional raters to make sure that there is a consensus among raters as to what that evaluation, what that grade should be. NBCMI is the National Board of Certification for Medical Interpreters, and they currently certify in 6 languages: Spanish, Russian, Korean, Vietnamese, Mandarin, Cantonese. All of these 6 have individual oral proficiency exams. And then the hub is like the core CHI for all other languages. When these 2 organizations started out, they were both accredited, but accreditation does not come cheap. It costs about $200,000 to get accredited, and it takes about 2 years to go through all the processes that are required, all the meetings, all the observations, etc. And when time for reaccreditation came up, NBCMI chose to develop additional oral proficiencies tests. I mean, these organizations are staffed mostly by volunteers. So there isn't an endless budget. There isn't an endless source of an income stream in order to be both accredited and to continue to develop tests. So I would say the Spanish test is just as good with NBCMI as it is for CCHI. But the tests that were developed later haven't been vetted by anyone. And the accrediting body that CCHI uses is the same accrediting body that accredits allied healthcare professionals like radiologists and phlebotomists and respiratory therapists, physical therapists, nurses, chosen specifically to support the idea of healthcare interpreters being part of the healthcare team, knowing that the provider would recognize that accreditation as being the same as their own is, I think, something valuable in order to be perceived as a team member rather than like a temp worker or a clerical worker. And that does make a difference in terms of your acceptance, especially if you're going to be hired as a staff medical interpreter reporting to the same hospital every day. So like I said, presently, of the 2 national healthcare certifications available for spoken language, only CCHI is accredited, and NCCA is the accrediting body that most allied healthcare professional certifications and licenses are accredited by. They have tough standards, and they deeply investigate and visit on site and go to the testing centers and want to meet the subject matter experts that develop the test, the psychometricians that develop the test. And for this reason, CCHI chose to undergo the process of accreditation and re-accreditation with NCCA. NBCMI, like I said, was also originally accredited, but did not re-accredit in order to have budget to pursue other projects, as is their right as an independent volunteer organization. So just a little bit about who NCCA is. They were founded in 1977. They were at the time called National Commission for Health Certifying Agencies. Then in 89, they changed their name to NCCA. And those standards were developed to help ensure the same health, welfare, and safety of all certifications across the country. So now let's look at a comparison of when you test from home. What's different about the CHI versus the CMI process? As you can see, there's a lot more things going on the CHI side, but they also provide a lot of resources online for you. So I'm going to do the short one first. For CMI, you're going to need to test from home, a high-speed internet connection. You can't have an unstable connection, because if it's Spanish, for example, you'll be recording certain responses, and you have to be able to stay connected and be able to upload those responses. If you're working on a corporate device, like if you're testing from work, you need to have your IT department contact them. And if you're testing from home, there's a protocol that you go through to make sure that your system meets their minimum requirements. You need to use the most up-to-date version of Chrome or Firefox. You need a webcam. It can be built into your laptop, and a headset. And you need to be using Windows or Apple operating system. For CHI, there are a lot more criteria surrounding your testing space. They want you to have a room with a door that closes. So it can't be an open space where people can walk in the background and pass or be visible. Just like when you work for a language service provider, you can't be sitting in the living room or at the kitchen counter and having people walk by that would be visible to view. You have to have a private space with a door that closes. Then they're going to actually ask you to physically lift and show the room 360 degrees to make sure that it's empty, and to make sure that there are no posters or information on the walls that you could be referring to. For example, that you didn't make a poster of the standards of practice. and that it needs to be well lit, and no third parties. That includes birds, dogs, cats, babies that are napping or anything like that can be present in the room. They're going to want to look at your workstation to make sure that the surface is clear, that there's nothing on it, no dictionaries, nothing visible, um, and that it'll be free of mobile phones, electronic devices, Apple Watches, no reference materials. And during the test, you have to be visible for the entire time. You can't get up and walk to another room, say to get away from noise. So if you change location while you're testing, if the lights go off, if they lose audio, if your connection fails, you kind of have to start all over. And like CMI, you need to have a desktop or laptop, a reliable internet connection. For CHI, it's only the Chrome browser that is compatible with the test, and either a webcam or a built-in one and microphone so that the remote proctor can watch you the whole time during the exam. And you actually have an appointment prior to the test where you confirm that your computer meets all of the technical specifications before the date of your exam. So that's a separate, like, it's not really a dress rehearsal, it's a specifications rehearsal to make sure that everything will go smoothly on the day of your test. Both organizations offer test prep materials. There's a link for NBCMI, and then it links directly to a bunch of PDFs for different aspects of the test prep. And CCHI has the preparing for the exam, preparing for the core, and it has a practice test for the CHI and a practice test for the CHI oral, which is worth checking out. The more you can prepare, the more familiar it is to you, the less nerve-wracking it will be on the day of the exam, and the better you will perform. If back in the day, I used to tell students before the at-home option was available, drive to the location of the test center before the day of your exam. Figure out where you're going to park. Figure out how to get there. Don't go there for the first time on the date of your test. What if you get lost? What if you're late? All that anxiety releases a bunch of bad biochemicals that you don't need prior to taking the test. You need to be as calm and collected as possible in order to perform at the top of your game, right? We only want to do this once, and hopefully you'll pass at your first attempt, especially if you prepare, if you take the practice exams, you do the specifications checkup prior to the date of your test, get all your ducks in a row so that you can be calm and collected on the day of your test. Let's compare cost. They are remarkably similar. Both charge $35 to register, and the initial fee for CHI is $35 more, $210. For CMI, it's $175. It's the same amount if you need to retake the test because you didn't pass the first time. And the exam fee for CHI is $275 versus the core, and the renewal fee is $285. For CMI, the hub is $175 and the CMI is $175, but the renewal is $300. So up and down, but overall, the CMI is less expensive. As for renewals, there are requirements to renew. Not only do you need to renew after 4 years, but you also need to complete X number of continuing education units in order to renew, and you have to pay to renew. So at the end of 4 years for CHI, it's $285. They require 32 continuing education hours, And 4 of those hours have to be directly related to performance-based topics. So what's a performance-based topic? Something that improves the mechanics of your interpreting. Does it improve your memory? Does it improve your speed? Does it improve your focus and attention? Does it improve your knowledge of terminology? Anything that directly impacts your performance is a performance-based training. Whereas CMI, it's slightly fewer hours, 30 hours, and no performance-based call out for continuing education. CHI accepts continuing education from a wide variety of sources, including, say, if you're a staff interpreter at a hospital, often the hospital will offer brown bag lunches on different topics: stroke, coronavirus, vaccine and immunizations. All of those are accepted, whereas with NBCMI, you can only choose from the list that they post on their site. I've listed here 4 really good places for you to get continuing education. And the first 3 are almost free or free. So National Council has a branch of the National Council called Home for Trainers. And I've been volunteering with Home for Trainers for over a decade, producing webinars. A $30 membership with National Council gives you access to every single webinar we've ever produced. There's over 50 of them, 55, I think. You've got over 80 hours of continuing education available to you for free if you pay the $30 to join the National Council. Certification Commission for Healthcare Interpreters has a number of webinars, and they're all free, and they count as continuing education. And that's the site right there. HCIN, which is Healthcare Interpreter Network. It's kind of like a co-op of different hospital staff interpreters that join together to pool their resources to fill the need coast to coast in all 50 states. They have a number of excellent webinars. They too are available free of charge. And then we also have a regional organization, Notice, Northwest Translators and Interpreters Society. This is the link to the calendar of events. But Notice, like every other regional interpreter organization, will charge per webinar, and it'll be $40 or $50, somewhere in there, for one event. So you can see the difference. The ones above, they're either free, or for a $30 membership, you have access to about 75 continuing education units. And Notice, it's a pay per event kind of thing, but they offer really good topics. So I wanted to include it. And it's also a good way to get to know interpreters in the region. You'll get to know colleagues in your language pair, and that's always helpful, because you need to be able to have people that you can consult when there's a difficult term, a new thing comes up. How many of us had all the terminology related to coronavirus, infection, immunity, herd immunity, gestation, mutation, all of the things that we have come to know, transmissibility, vulnerable populations. There's a whole glossary that goes with coronavirus and vaccinations that we may not have been quite as up on before the pandemic started, but everyone who's been interpreting knows all those term equivalents now. And having trained, certified colleagues that you can tap, whether it's through a Facebook group or because you've gotten to know each other by attending these regional continuing education events, regional conferences, it's a valuable resource for you, in addition to having a good dictionary and having a good place to go to consult for terminology, your fellow professional interpreters are also a really good resource. Now, I would like to play this short video. I think it's like 7 minutes long, because again, it's a comparison of CCHI and NBCMI. And I believe Rosapina holds both those certifications. And she calls out some differences that I failed to notice myself. And I thought it would be valuable to share those insights. So here we go.
Interpreting. My name is Rosa, and I'm a dual certified medical interpreter.
Are you?
And if you're interested in becoming certified or you would like to learn more about the credentials available, this video is for you. And keep watching until the end because I will share with you which program worked better for me. In case you didn't know it, there are two entities that offer a nationally recognized credential for healthcare or medical interpreters. There's the Certification Commission for Healthcare Interpreters, or CCHI, and the National Board of Certification for Medical Interpreters, or NBCMI. CCHI is accredited by the NCCA, which is an entity that basically oversees their certification process. NBCMI had this credential in the past for Spanish, but in early 2018, they decided not to pursue it to reallocate resources to improve their program in other languages. This raised a lot of questions in our industry, but the bottom line is, as far as I know, both credentials are equally recognized and accepted nationwide. And did you know that they actually have a history in common? Well, since the mid-80s, different organizations had been working to create a national certification, but it wasn't until 2008 when a group of them officially joined forces and became members of a coalition. They would develop their first national certification for medical interpreters. However, in 2009, a couple of these members announced they would develop their own certification program, and they founded the NBCMI. And later on that same year, some of the original members of the coalition founded the CCHI. Now, let's compare these credentials. Both offer two levels of certification. The first one is the one you earn after passing a written test in English, and it's valid for all languages. CCHI's is called Core CHI, and NBCMI's is called Hub CMI, which they started offering in 2020. The second one is available only for certain languages after passing an oral test, and at the moment, CCHI offers the full credential called CHI for 3 languages, which are Spanish, Arabic, and Mandarin. And the NBCMI offers the full credential called CMI for 6 languages, which are Spanish, Mandarin, Cantonese, Russian, Vietnamese, and Korean. To get started, both programs require candidates to register. The registration cost is $35. There are also requirements to meet, and the common ones are the minimum age, which is 18, and having at least a high school diploma or GED from a US-based or foreign institution. Now, here is where I noticed significant differences. You have to prove proficiency in English and in another language. If you don't have a diploma or have not taken a proficiency test in either one, CCHI takes into consideration the time you've spent studying or working in a country where the language is spoken. However, NBCMI does require either a diploma or meeting the minimum score in one of their approved language proficiency tests. Also, while both require 40 hours of medical interpreter training, CCHI accepts a combination of academic and non-academic courses in medical interpreting. Plus, they allow you to add up hours from certain on-the-job training. However, NBCMI is very specific about the courses approved for their program. Once your registration is approved, the deadline for you to take the written test varies. With CCHI, you have 6 months to take the written test. With NBCMI, you have 1 year. CCHI's written test is a computer-based test offered year-round, and it's administered at specific testing sites. But as of April 2020, they are allowing candidates to test from home temporarily, waiting on the NCCA to give final approval to make it permanent. It has 100 multiple choice questions, about 75% of which are related to ethics and standards of practice, and about 25% are related to medical terminology. You get 2 hours to complete it. The NBCMI's written test is also a computer based test offered year round at designated testing sites or from the comfort of your home. It has 51 multiple choice questions, about 40% of which are related to ethics and standards, and about 60% are related to medical terminology. You get 75 minutes to complete it. The cost of the written test with both organizations is $175. After you pass it, if there's an oral test available in your language pair, there are deadlines to keep in mind. CCHI gives you up to 1 year to take the oral test, and the NBCMI gives you up to 2 years. For the oral test, CCHI has specific testing windows each year, and you can only test at one of their approved testing sites. NBCMI offers these tests year-round, and you can test at designated testing sites or at home. CCHI will test you in 4 areas: consecutive and simultaneous interpreting, sight translation, and translation, which you will see in the test in that particular order. For the consecutive segment, there are 4 scenarios with straightforward vocabulary and terminology, and while the utterances are fairly short, the scenarios are long. There are 2 simultaneous segments from English and into English, and as far as I remember, each one lasts about a couple of minutes, and the speed should be around 120 words per minute or less. You have to sight translate 2 short texts from English and into English, and the translation is done by selecting an answer from a multiple choice question, and it's from English into the other language. The NBCMI test has 12 mini scenarios that you will interpret in the consecutive mode, which is simply means that each scenario has fewer utterances. However, I found that some utterances were longer compared to the CHI test, and there were more medical terms, cultural references, and colloquial language involved. There are also 2 sight translation passages from English only, and there are no simultaneous or translation components. You get 60 minutes for each test, and the cost is $275. After the exam, CCHI can take up to 8 weeks to score your test, and the NBCMI can take up to 10 weeks. The grand total for the certification process is $485. And by the way, I didn't include this in the total because it's optional, but after you pass your test, you can order your badge. The CCHI badge costs $28, and CMI badge costs $35, and both include a lanyard and free shipping within the US, and they're printed on hard plastic similar to a driver's license. The CHI certification has to be renewed every 4 years, and the CMI certification has to be renewed every 5 years. CCHI requires 32 hours of continuing education, and the NBCMI requires 30, and the renewal costs $300. As you can see, after comparing the certifications, both have pros and cons. CCHI's registration is more flexible, but their scheduling and testing options are not. NBCMI has stricter registration requirements, but more flexible testing options and deadlines to schedule your tests or renew your credential. So in my case, while I do think that both are equally essential assets to the interpreting community, my experience with the NBCMI was better because I already had all the documents required to register, so that wasn't a problem for me. And living in a remote location at the time, I was able to test from home. Bottom line is, you can't go wrong with either one you choose, and you have to take into consideration things like your language of expertise, where you live, timing restrictions, and other individual factors.
Interesting that there are some differences in terms of the registration, and that CCHI does make it easier, in particular for interpreters that may have just recently immigrated and aren't currently taking a college or community college class. Finding a place to take that ACTFL language proficiency test is not always the easiest thing. So if you have a diploma from high school or from university or proof of employment, that you lived in another country, that can serve as your language proficiency or your proof of language proficiency. So that can make it easier for, say, recent arrivals. But you all are already taking classes and can point directly to that training. So that step should not be a hurdle for any of you. The last thing I wanted to mention is just what additional benefits there are to being certified as a working interpreter. Like I mentioned, any facility that takes any federal money, even if it's $1 a year, they're required to only hire certified, trained interpreters. But there's lots of other places you can work too that may not require that, like a language service provider. If you're certified, you will get paid more per hour. That's just a basic truth. They take into account your education, your years of experience, figuring out where to tier your hourly rate or your per minute rate if you're working for a telephonic services language service provider. But it factors in. Certification is a big bump, a couple dollars an hour. A couple dollars an hour is nothing to laugh at. And the inclusiveness as well as the simplicity, not having to take all these little in-house tests when you go to register with Universal Language Services or Seracom or Dynamic or the Language Connection, or I'm trying to think of some other names here in Washington, Academy of Languages, AOLT. They all have their own in-house test if you're not certified. So you get to skip over that sort of tedious interview process or testing process because you won't escape. If you don't want to take the test because you don't like taking tests, you don't want to be certified, you're still going to have to take a test when you register with a language service provider. And one language service provider generally is not enough to fill up your calendar. You're probably going to have to register with 2 or 3 agencies to stay as busy as you want to be. So that's 2 or 3 testing hurdles you got to jump over. Just take the one, have the certification that opens the door for you, regardless of where you have to show that proof of proficiency, preparation, training, qualification. And then finally, I wanted to mention Washington State. The reason why this wasn't included more robustly at the beginning is that when the pandemic hit, the language testing portal shut down. It shut down in February of 2020 and only reopened last month, more than 2 years. And it reopened last month to this pent up demand of 2 years of interpreters waiting to be tested, particularly those who had already taken the written and were just waiting for the date to take the oral. And they only released 100 spots. And it's 100 spots a month. It's not easy. I had my students waiting online. First, you have to set up a SAW account, which is a Washington State like services account. Then you have to link the SAW account to the DSHS LTC portal so that an additional tab for DSHS LTC appears in your SAW account. Once you've done that, and only when you've done that will you be able to go to the site and actually see the little blue button that says schedule a test. And the day that the tests drop for the following month is usually the first week of the month on a Wednesday or a Thursday that the following month's dates will open. And within 15 minutes, they're gone. So it's could take like a year for you to get a test date. Why do I know this from personal experience? Well, before the pandemic, I was in Europe. Actually, I was teaching a medical tourism class in Portugal when DSHS finally started requiring continuing education credits of all the DSHS registered interpreters. And they sent out an email to everyone that was medically or social services certified with DSHS and said, by August 30th, you need to come and take this class on ethics and the orientation, et cetera, in order to be recertified. And then starting the date of your recertification, you'll need X number of continuing education credits within a 4-year period in order to recertify going forward. Well, I was in Europe, so I could not attend that. And also, in a bit of irony, the voice on the webinar that's recorded that DSHS uses for the code of ethics training and the orientation is me. So I said, do you really need me to take this? I mean, I'm the one who created the quiz. I have the answer sheet. Ethically, do you think that's right? And they said, no, you have to take it, but you have to take it in person. We have to see that you took it. And I was like, well, that's just not going to happen. I'm not going to fly back from Portugal to take that. So I lost my medical certification and had to start over. I came back in September, went on the portal to choose a written test date. It took me until March. And trust me, I was hovering with my mouse ready to go 5 minutes before it went live on the day that the following month's test dates would be made available. And I could not, the calendar would open and every day would be grayed out. There would not be a single day that you could choose. So it took until March till I got my written test. And then I had to wait, which was the old protocol. You had to wait until you received a letter in the mail, snail mail, ladies and gentlemen, telling you whether or not you had passed the written test before you could proceed to book the oral portion, the oral test, which again was the same horrible portal situation. So it took me, I think, 11 months from start to finish, despite being on it from the moment I got back. So for that reason, the frustration factor was very high in getting in and just getting a test date for DSHS. So here's the information. You have a site where you can go, a manual with study materials to prepare for the test, and the test registration information link right here. But it is still not an easy process. And of those 100 slots per month, they're only testing in 2 cities right now, Olympia and Yakima. I don't know how they're dividing those up. Are they giving 50 slots to Yakima and only 50 to Olympia? So the odds of being able to connect with a test date are small. It doesn't mean it's not a test worth taking. It's just that the registration process is rife with challenge. I'll just leave it at that. So any questions from the group? I'm just going to recommend go straight for the national certification. It's recognized in all 50 states. You can work locally, directly with a clinic, with a hospital, or you can work with a language service provider. Many of them let you work from home if you have a quiet space with a door with privacy. So that really is very convenient for those with families, for those that are going to school. You can pick your hours. But feel free, if you think of something later, like I do 15 minutes after the event is over, that's my email, interpretertrainer@outlook. Shoot me an email and I will, if I don't know the answer, I'll do my best to find out and get back to you quickly. So thanks for inviting me, everybody. I'm really, really happy to see that there's training going on in more than one place here in Washington. It shows an awareness of the importance of language access and how it's not just the police and the courts, but so critical to good or to bettering people's health outcomes. And that's something that I take tremendous satisfaction out of participating in. And that's also something money can't buy. When you help people get to a better place, that's a good thing. So get out there, get certified, get paid what you're worth, and do work that brings you good fulfillment. You can do this for a long time. I've been doing it for a long time and I still love it. And if you love it, it's not work, right?